Okay, so this is chapter 6. We're looking at organizational structure and design. Right, apologies for the lack of using technology. I would point out that I have a computer here, it's all in, the operating system's all in Korean, the PowerPoint's in Korean. So to try and work out how to put it into a video and sort of put me on it is a bit of a nightmare. So I'll leave that for another day. I will get around to doing that. So this is kind of a cheap way of doing it, but it should work okay. We're going to look at various points here today. The first thing we're going to look at is the 6 elements of organizational structure. To make sure we're doing this right. I'm just going to quickly run through all these. Because I want to get on to the main points. I'm going to talk fairly quickly. You can skip back in the video and watch it again if you need to. The first thing I want to talk about is work specialization. Now, what this is it's taking a job and breaking it down into different elements and giving each person one little element of that process to do. So rather than somebody sort of trying to do many different things, you just have one particular job. Now this first came around about many years ago, and the Ford Motor Company were very famous for this. That they set up these long production lines, and each person had just one particular job to do on that line. So whether it was tightening a certain bolt or putting something in the car, that's all they had to do. It was very simple. You didn't need to give people much training for it, and production was much quicker. If you look at McDonald's, there is a video link on here. It's from a movie called The Founder. It talks about sort of the startup of McDonald's and how it became so big and so successful. It shows you there about work specialization. Each person has one particular thing to do, and it's very controlled how they do it. Now, if we look at this diagram, what we can see is that the more we specialize something, the productivity will go up. So the more we're specializing job, the productivity is going up. However, it gets to a point where if they're only doing one little thing, it gets very repetitive, very boring. And actually the person's productivity can go down because they're just getting tired and doing their job that it's kind of meaningless for them. So this is a really important point. And it's one of the driving factors that now people are going towards automation, because automation can take the place of humans doing that. Machines don't get bored of doing jobs. If people are getting bored of doing jobs, quite often they make mistakes. Quite often they work slower. Quite often, they find reasons to stop doing something. So it's easier to take over this with machines. So it's something to be careful of when you're organising work. Yes, it might be very productive, but if it's going to be really boring for the people doing the job, then that's going to have negative effects on it. So work specialization. Another point we're going to look at is, where are we? I'll come back to chain of command. I'll come back to span of control as well, actually. I'll explain what these are when we get some diagrams to look at. What I want to look at first is authority, power and responsibility. Now, the authority is if you get given a job as, let's say you're a middle manager, you have authority to do certain things, to give people work to do, to hire and fire people if necessary. That's your authority. It's kind of a power that you are given. Your responsibility is to make sure that everything under your authority is done properly. So let's say your authority is to look after the management of one department. So you're responsible for making sure that department operates effectively. So you can use your authority, your power to make sure that happens. You've been put in charge of that. So authority and responsibility. Power is a little different. Power is exactly what it says, but it's not necessarily given to you. You can get power from different elements. We will come back to this in a minute. I'll explain what power is then. I'm doing it in line of slides. Let's look at some different authorities first. Now I mentioned chain of command. Chain of command is what we might call a line authority. So at the top we have the senior manager, and he's in charge of this person here effectively, but it follows a line down through this one, to this one, to this one, to this one. Okay? So everybody has a line of or a chain of command. So here this person goes up through here. As you can see, this person is in charge of all these people. So all of them follow the same line of command or chain of command up through there. Okay? So that's what we call chain of command, the official route through which you should report. Staff authority is a little different. You might have a chain of command, somebody coming up through here. So this person reports to this person, but also these people are senior as well. They're staff, they're people who are there to support the managers above them. So in this case, we've got somebody who's doing, we've got like the production people here, so these people are doing the work in the actual factory itself, and they come under the manager of that unit. That manager reports to the director of operations, so kind of the production director. However, we've got other functions up here. So maybe for human resources, this person is in charge of that or is a support person for this. He doesn't have direct authority over these people, but he or she has authority just through their position. So it's like a senior manager who's not your direct manager, but will still have power or some authority over what you're doing. Okay, because they're higher up the level and they're there to advise this guy here. So this person here is an assistant to the executive director. He doesn't have direct authority over you, but you need to understand and listen to what he says and that, because he reports direct to him, and he can sort of, his authority comes from him. He's going to back him up all the time. Okay, so it's what we call like a staff authority. That they're in senior positions. They're not directly in charge of you, but effectively they have authority over you as well. Authority versus power. Let's go back to span of control first. A span of control really is just the number of people you have directly under you. So for example, this person here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people under them. So that's their span of control. Some of them can be quite flat. So you might have like many people under you. Some of them might have only a few people under them. So span of control just talks about the number of subordinates you have. Now, the thing to point out here is the fact that usually the higher kind of difficulty in doing the job, like the higher kind of education you need for a job, then the smaller that span of control is going to be for the person in charge of you. So let me give you an example. If you're working in a production factory where people are just putting things together, they're unskilled lay workers, the manager will have many people under him because it's quite simple to give them the work to do. You might have 100 people all operating the same kind of machinery, all doing sort of the same job. So that's quite simple. There's not much daily dealings you have with each individual person. They can get on and do their job, and you only have to deal with when there's a problem. If you're in a research and design department, that's a little different. You can't deal with 100 different researchers or sort of designers, because they'll be looking for a lot more input from you per person. They're going to come to you with issues and problems, so you're going to have a much smaller span of control because of the technical difficulties of their job and what it involves. Same with if it's marketing or something, you'll get a lot more involved in what they're doing. They'll have questions that they come to you. It's a lot more complex. It needs a lot more of your time. So normally a span of control, if it's a more straightforward, simple job, you have more people. More difficult jobs, you have fewer people. Okay, so we're looking at, we mentioned about authority and power and responsibility. Well, just to explain power again. So power is not necessarily some given authority, but it's still the ability to influence and get people to do things. This comes from 5 places. One is, if we think of it outside of the work environment first. First one is based on fear. Traditionally, people have been who have maybe physical power or something, or very nasty people. If you're in fear of them for whatever reason, then that's their power. So the same in the workplace. If you're afraid that they will do something to you, then if they have some ability to do something to you, then they've got power over you. Look at this. The next one is kind of the opposite of that. It's a positive thing. If somebody's able to reward you for doing that, so giving you money incentives for doing it. Again, if we think about in society, rich people have power because you know that they can give you something. So hence that's where they get their power from. So if we think about in society, sort of rich people have power. People who maybe are quite physically dangerous or can do something to you, they have power of some degree in a negative way. When we talk about authority, we're talking about power. So that's what we call the legitimate power. That's the power they've been given in a position. Doesn't necessarily mean they're very powerful. Like some people in a position don't have a lot of power, even though they're in that position. Other people seem to do have a lot of power. So sometimes it's a combination of these things. Somebody might have a very high position, but if they don't have the ability to actually do very much in terms of spend money, reward people, etc., then you could say, well, they're not really very powerful. In other ways, somebody who has the ability to spend money and do things, then they have a lot more. They have a lot more power. Expert power. So if somebody has some technical knowledge or know-how, they're very good at doing things, then they have power over you. So if it's like, for instance, people in IT have always had a lot more power than other people because they've got that ability to deal with the fundamental equipment that you need, you absolutely rely on to make your business work. So IT people always seem to have this power. Although people are getting more au fait with IT, sort of, the IT people still have a lot of that power. In an extreme way, if we look at motor racing, the drivers in motor racing have extreme amounts of power if they're very good, because they can maybe change other people in the company, sort of, who, some of the car mechanics and that kind of thing. It's easy to change them, but it's not easy to change your top driver. Are you going to get another one as good as your top driver? So in that way, they have a lot more power. So somebody who has a certain skill. I think in the airline industry, pilots at the moment are gaining power because there's a big requirement for more pilots, and there aren't enough pilots to go around. So again, they have a lot of power. And they've got that through their training, through their experience. The last one, referent power. This comes from, like, if you have something that other people want to use. So in a company, if you have some system in the company that other people want to use, you do some process and you want them to do something for you, they have power over you. So imagine if you're in like the holiday business, and let's say you're in Chuncheon and you want to do some tours with people, and there's only one bus company in Chuncheon. That person has a lot of power because you have to go to them to use their buses. Okay, so if somebody has something that you want, that gives them a lot of power. I would say that there's this idea with power. What this describes is the closer you are to the core, the more powerful you are. So if you can imagine here, that obviously this is, if we talk about the level of authority, so this is the top level. The top level person is at the center, so they have a lot of power. As you come down different levels, you might be of this level, but if you're on the outside, you don't have as much power as the person who's in the middle. So it depends on all those other factors as to how much power you have. So this idea that your level does not mean that you have more power than other people. It's from all these other factors. So quite often people in the finance department might have a lot of power because they kind of control the money side of things. People rely on the finance department to tell them what they can and can't spend, how well things are going, even though they don't actually do any of the work that makes the company money. They have a lot of power because of their expertise and what they do. So this kind of suggests that it's not so much where you are on the level, but how close you are to this core. Like I said about IT people, you might suggest that certain IT people, they might be low down here, but they might be very central to this core here, so they have a lot more power for their level. If you're a general production worker, then you're going to be out here somewhere. You won't have much power at all. Okay. So it's not just about your level, it's about all these other factors that can influence the power. Okay, just very briefly, centralization, decentralization. This really is about how much authority is delegated by sort of the managers. So something that's centralized means that a lot of the decisions are made by the managers and also a lot higher up. So the lower managers don't really have much to do in terms of making decisions. Something that's decentralized means that the senior managers allow junior managers to make more decisions. They have more freedom how to do the work. So it depends on what the organization is and how they operate. I want to move on to departmentalization. This is how we kind of organize the company or organize the operation of the company. So we can break it up in different ways. Now these are very traditional ways of doing it. We'll look at the more modern ways in a minute. So if we look at functional departmentalization, this is where we break it up into the different types of things that happen in the company. So you'll have the finance department, the marketing department. So we're putting them into different departments as such. The production department. So they're all put into their different functions. Sort of the research and design department, etc. So all these traditional names. That was a very traditional way of organising it. So you know where everything is, who does what. If we look at the product way of splitting up, this is where maybe we're organised it so that people working on one particular kind of product will get work in one department or one unit. So if we look at electronics, or a company that makes electrical goods, you might have the people, sort of the ones who work on like kitchen appliances, washing machines, that kind of thing, rice cookers. They're all in one department. The people who work on TVs, that entertainment things, they work in a different unit. Again, mobile phones, smartphones, they work in a different unit. So you're breaking it up by the different kinds of product. So you might have a research and design sort of section in each of those different units. We might do it by customers or groups of customers. Again, like if you're servicing other industries, like the company I worked for, we did different industries. So we did the automotive, so the car industry, we did the computer industry, we did other electrical goods industries. So it could be broken up by that. So okay, you people work on automotive, you people work on computer stuff. So you can break it up like that, the different kinds of so you're looking at the different, here we're looking at the different customers. Sort of, you might have the same product you're making, but you're doing it for different customers. So computer companies, we were selling things to computer companies, others were selling things to the car industry, etc. So you can break it up like that. Geographical, so just where they're based. So if you think about supermarkets, they're kind of like this, like E-Mart, etc., Home Plus. They're different geographical locations. Again, you can do that worldwide, sort of different companies in different countries. Although, I mean, we do have globalization now, so that kind of comes into it later. But this is a traditional way of doing it. And process. Now, process is kind of, it's a bit like the top one, functional, but it's breaking up into different operations that are required to to make the product or to provide the service for the customer. So it's not so much the different functions, but each part of the process. So it might be the research and design for that, the manufacturing of parts for something, the assembly. So it's breaking up into the different process. So if you imagine you follow a line to make the product, it goes through all these different departments when it's processed down. So it's kind of like this, but it's kind of like taking the production side of this and it's all its support operations and putting them into groups like that. Let's look at this one. Mechanistic versus organic. So if we look at the traditional like pyramid structure that we always see, with the CEO at the top and then the senior management and then the lower level management, we look at this kind of organization. So you've got one person at the top and then many people at the bottom. It's very clear about who's in charge. You have lines of authority. It's very organized, and quite often they have to imply a lot of rules, directions how to do things. Organic kind of means that there isn't really anybody in charge. There's no rules, there's no boundaries for anything. So it's a group of people working together to get something done. Now, really, the difference here is like this would normally happen with small businesses, maybe startup businesses, maybe where there's a lot of expertise, technical expertise, or etc. And everybody can get in and work together and help each other. Nobody's doing one specified job. They're each doing whatever they can to help out. Whereas this is very formalized. Each person works in a certain area, they do a certain job, and they don't do other things. I would say I've worked in both, doing engineering. Like I worked in a very mechanized way, working for a very big company, and it was very controlled about what you did and what you didn't do. So I was responsible for running projects. If I wanted something done, if I wanted something made, I'd have to go through a process to make an application to get somebody to do it for me. But it was kind of very organized. I worked for a very small company. There were, I think, 6 or 8 of us working there at any one time, doing the same job, producing very much the same thing. But here, you kind of had to help out with everything. So if I wanted something made, sometimes I'd go and do it myself because other people are busy, and it's far easier for me to get on and do that myself. I could go in and do stuff. It meant things like I got involved in sales and marketing a lot of the time because there wasn't really anybody specified for doing that, so we all kind of had to help out. This is a lot more fun. You have a lot more responsibility with it, but it's a lot more enjoyable to do this. This is kind of gets very controlled. So if you want to work for a big company like Samsung or something, you're going to end up like this. And it's one of these situations where, okay, this is your desk, this is where you work, this is how you do it, and there's lots of rules, etc. This is much more open. You might get less salary, it might be a bigger risk in terms of the success or failure of the company, but it's a lot more enjoyable. Okay? But this won't necessarily work for big companies. You couldn't employ hundreds of people like this because it's going to get very disorganized. You'd need some way of breaking that up and splitting that up. Okay, just a quick one about this. Unit production is when you're making small quantities of stuff. So I think I give my example about shipbuilding, sort of like you're making one ship or maybe 2, similar kind of thing. Mass production is when you're making a lot of things that are all similar, but you're not making them all the time. So you might be making one kind of product maybe for days, but then you'll switch over, you change the machinery over and you start making something else. You're not making the same one product all the time, although you're making it in large numbers. Process is where it never changes. You're just constantly making the same thing over and over. So when we think about sort of sort of fluids like oil industry or drinks industry, that kind of thing is like that. The car industry used to be like this, But now it's gone very much like this. That if you look at cars, they're a lot more different now than they used to be. You get many more different kinds of models or variations of the same model. So it's gone more like this. People want something different now. Many years ago, it used to be much more like this, that there was very little difference. Okay, let's just look at the different structures here. We'll look at the diagrams here. So a functional structure is where it's broken up into, it's broken up through the different functions. So, for instance, we've got the purchasing people here, we've got the IT people here, etc. So it's divided up into different functions. Divisional is where we've divided it into different divisions, so that here these divisions are making different product. So we've got fuels here, we've got chemicals here. So it's all the same kind of thing, but it's broken up into products. So you've got, and then in here you've got marketing, etc., manufacturing in each of these sections, but they're making different product. Okay, so this is kind of like the product side. Let's get through this writing. Okay, it talks about different structures, team-based things. This is a matrix. Now what we've got here is we've got some different, where are we? We've got some different projects going. So we've got, just giving them different names here. So there's four different projects here, and it's taken individuals from each different department. So we've got people from manufacturing helping out here. We've got people from accounting helping out. So these people are assigned to this project, the Alpha project. So they report, or they work together as a team. However, they still also report to the managers in their department. Okay, so they're kind of reporting to two different people. At the end of these projects, they will go back to their department and then maybe get assigned to a different group when another project comes up. So here they stay in that project group until that project is complete, and then they go back to their department and get assigned to a different one. Okay, so although they're working in this group, they're part of this department. So we get this matrix effect where there's kind of a crossover with it. It's different. It's different from a team on teams where we've got teams. They're put into different teams, and they permanently in those teams. They're always working on that particular type of work. So this is a more modern way of approach to organising things, that we can put people into sort of different groups and teams and organise them that way. The idea is that people like this can work much more closely together on something to solve the issues in that project, rather than like having this hierarchy where they have to go back through their managers to talk to people. That's kind of an old way of doing it. So this is a much better way of doing it now. Okay, learning organisation. Learning organisation is one that's been able to learn and adapt to the changing environment. So they're always going to keep ahead of what's happening. So they kind of have to be able to look at what they're doing. Just some points about this. The actual organisation itself, usually they're kind of boundaryless, or they're very flexible. So go back to that organic design. They're much more like that. There's very little rigidity. And people are empowered. They're given authority and responsibility to do the work how they see fit to do it. The culture is kind of, everybody feels that they're part of the same organisation. They feel they're working together. There's a lot of trust. And there's a lot of sharing, so sharing of information, etc. There's no, nobody keeps things secret or to themselves. They make sure everybody knows this. So, you know, that kind of family sort of bonding is really important like this. And it's important for the leadership to try and encourage this. Make sure that everybody feels, understands what they're doing and feels part of the same organisation, and make sure that they're working together and helping each other. Okay, one last point about culture and how that affects your organisation. Every business has its own culture, every organisation has its own culture, and this normally comes from the founders of the organisation. And when they hire other people, when they recruit people to help them, they pass on those thoughts, that knowledge. Quite often they'll hire people who fit in with what they want. They won't hire somebody who's very different to what they want. So that kind of disseminates through the organisation. So, you know, they try and recruit the right people, and they tell people what they want to do and how they want to work. And this information will get shared in just stories about the company. It also gets shared in kind of the actual information. You might get standards, rules, processes written down about how you should do your job, what you can do, what you can't do. So that all kind of represents the organisation. Just the way it's organised, the way it's set up physically. You know, if you're in an office and you've got lots of standard desks together with partitions up, that kind of tells you they're a bit more mechanical in how they're organised. If it's somewhere where it's a lot more open, it might tell you it's a bit more organic, and there's a lack of control there, or there's a lack of restriction there. So the actual culture of the organisation will help determine what the structure is actually like. So if we see classic things about Google and the Google Workplace, there's a video link on here to one of the Google Workplaces. If we look at that, it kind of tells you something about what the organisation is like, what their culture is like. Okay, that's it for this. If you've got any questions, then please send me your questions, and I'll try and sort of answer any questions you have. Next week, there's another quiz coming up, so be careful of that. Also next week, we've kind of got 2 units that we're going to kind of combine together a little bit, so they'll be shortened down a bit, about human resource management and managing change. So we're going to try and get those done in like 1 week, okay? And after that, you've got a midterm exam, which is at the beginning of May. Okay.